Thanksgiving Day, an annual national holiday in the United States and Canada, is generally considered a celebration of the harvest and other blessings of the past year. Americans generally believe that their Thanksgiving is modeled on a 1621 harvest feast shared by the English colonists or Pilgrims of Plymouth and the Wampanoag people. However, for many Native Americans, Thanksgiving is not a heartwarming holiday marked by gathering with family and serving others, but rather a reminder of genocide, colonialism, and oppression. It is a symbol of smallpox blankets, Christianity, land grabs, and manifest destiny. In an article at the Howard Zinn Project, William Loren Katz, author of over 40 books on African American history and Black Indians' rights, in 1620, 149 English pilgrims aboard the Mayflower landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts, and survived their first New England winter when the Wampanoag people brought them corn, meat, and other gifts and taught them survival skills. In 1621, Governor William Bradford of Plymouth proclaimed a day of thanksgiving, not for his Wampanoag saviors, but his brave pilgrims. Through resourcefulness and devotion to God, his Christians had defeated hunger. We are still asked to see Thanksgiving through the eyes of Governor Bradford. But Bradford's fable is an early example of Eurothink, a concoction by Europeans that casts their conquest as heroic. Bradford claims Native Americans were invited to the dinner. A seat at the table. Really? Since pilgrims classified their indigenous saviors as infidels and inferiors, if invited at all, they were asked to provide and serve and not share the food. Pilgrim armies soon pushed westward. In 1637, Governor Bradford sent his troops to raid a Pequot village. As devout Christians locked in mortal combat with heathens, pilgrims systematically destroyed a village of sleeping men, women, and children. Bradford was overjoyed. It was a fearful sight to see them frying in the fire and the streams of blood quenching the same, and horrible was the stink and stench thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they, the Pilgrim militia, gave praise thereof to God. Years later, Pilgrim Reverend Increase Mather asked his congregation to celebrate the victory and thank God that on this day we have sent 600 heathen souls to hell. Thanksgiving Day celebrates not justice or equality, but aggression and enslavement. It affirms the genocidal beliefs that destroyed millions of Native American people and their cultures from the Pilgrim landings to the 20th century. Long before pilgrims landed at Plymouth, thousands of enslaved Africans and Native Americans united to fight the European invaders and slavers. In the age of Columbus and the Spanish invasion, they were led by Taino leaders such as Anacayona, a woman poet who was captured at 29, and Hatue, who in 1511 led his 400 followers from Hispaniola to Cuba to warn of the foreigners, and the next year was captured. Anacayona and Hatue were both burned at the stake. Before the Mayflower, thousands of runaway Africans and Indians in northeast Brazil had begun to unite in the Republic of Palmares, a three-walled maroon fortress that enabled Ganga Zumba's 10,000 people of color to defeat Dutch and Portuguese armies. Palmares lasted until 1694, almost 100 years. These early freedom fighters kept no written records, but some of their ideas about freedom, justice, and equality found their way into a sacred parchment Americans celebrate each July 4th. The traditional and logical way to celebrate freedom fighters has been to start with the earliest. Anacayona and Hatue would tell us Columbus and the Pilgrims do not qualify for anything but condemnation. Howard Zinn, in his best-selling book, A People's History of the United States, 1492, present, begins his first chapter on Columbus, the Indians, and human progress, speaking about the Arawak people and their courteous and human reception of Columbus. What happens next is detailed in his book. Arawak men and women, naked, tawny, and full of wonder, emerged from their villages onto the island's beaches and swam out to get a closer look at the strange big boat. When Columbus and his sailors came ashore, carrying swords, speaking oddly, the Arawaks ran to greet them, brought them food, water, gifts. He later wrote of this in his log. They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. These Arawaks of the Bahama Islands were much like Indians on the mainland, who were remarkable, European observers were to say again and again, for their hospitality, their belief in sharing. These traits did not stand out in the Europe of the Renaissance, dominated as it was by the religion of popes, the government of kings, the frenzy for money that marked Western civilization and its first messenger to the Americas, Christopher Columbus. Columbus wrote, "As soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts." The information that Columbus wanted most was, where is the gold? He had persuaded the King and Queen of Spain to finance an expedition to the lands. The wealth he expected would be on the other side of the Atlantic, the Indies and Asia, gold and spices. For, like other informed people of his time, he knew the world was round and he could sail west in order to get to the Far East. Late Howard Zinn ends his over 600 pages historic book speaking about the Clinton era and writes, "As we pass from one century to another, one millennium to one another, we would like to think that history itself is transformed as dramatically as the calendar. However, it rushes on, as it always did, with two forces racing toward the future, one splendidly uniformed, the other ragged but inspired. There is the past and its continuing horrors, violence, war, prejudices against those who are different, outrageous monopolization of the good earth's wealth by a few, political power in the hands of liars and murderers, the building of prisons instead of schools, the poisoning of the press and the entire culture by money. It is easy to become discouraged observing this, especially since this is what the press and television insist that we look at, and nothing more. But there is also, though much of this is kept from us to keep us intimidated and without hope, the bubbling of change under the surface of obedience, the growing revulsion against the endless wars. I think of the Russian women in the 90s, demanding their country end its military intervention in Chechnya, as did Americans during the Vietnam War. The insistence of women all over the world that they will no longer tolerate abuse and subordination. We see, for instance, the new international movement against female genital mutilation and the militancy of welfare mothers against punitive laws. There is civil disobedience against the military machine, protest against police brutality directed especially at people of color. In the United States, we see the educational system, a burgeoning new literature, alternative radio stations, a wealth of documentary films outside the mainstream, even Hollywood itself, and sometimes television compelled to recognize the growing multiracial character of the nation. Yes, we have in this country, dominated by corporate wealth and military power and two antiquated political parties, what a fearful conservative characterized as a permanent adversarial culture, challenging the present, demanding a new future. It is a race in which we can all choose to participate or just to watch. But we should know that our choice will help determine the outcome. I think of the words of the poet Shelley, recited by women garment workers in New York to one another at the start of the 20th century.
Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few.